So for the past few weeks, we have been, initially this started off with the question about, how do we know that we are doing things because we love God, or we're doing them as kind of I'm scared of going to hell. Not to put too fine a point on it. And we started in Judges chapter 16, and specifically verse 20. We're looking at the account of Samson, and we find in verse 20, as we've mentioned each time, that he had woken up every day was just like the last day, because he didn't know that God had left him. And we were going over the various aspects of the Nazirite vow and connecting that to the spiritual vow, if you will, that a Christian takes when they're baptized, because baptism, it is more than just for the forgiveness of sins, right? And what I mean by that is that when someone chooses to become a Christian, and they choose that, Jesus is the Lord of their life, they are entering into a covenant relationship, and there is a vow or vows that are taken there. And that we are to not live by the flesh, but by the fruit of the Spirit, and so on. And so we're kind of making those connections there initially, and how for many Christians it can be that they don't recognize that they've drifted away. Samson, consecrated from birth, he did not recognize that God had left him. And the reason that he didn't recognize it was because he did not recognize his own faults and how he had treated the covenant relationship that he had with God. And we had talked about him being separate from wine and strong drink, and the razor on his head there from Numbers chapter 6, and that it was really something that was outward, that was pointing to his consecration. If you were in the time of the Old Testament, and you were one of the children of Israel, there were several priests. But the only way that you could tell that they were priests really was in the way that they're dressed. If you just saw them kind of walking down the street and they were like everybody else, you would not necessarily know that they were a priest. But it was, the outfit that they wore and the various stones and adornments and what have you. So it was something outward that pointed to something inward, or something spiritual. So when we look at Samson and his hair, again, it wasn't that his locks were magical or anything. But it represented a covenant identity and a belonging to God. So when his hair was cut, the issue wasn't that he all of a sudden had short hair, but it was really that there was a violation of holiness, and Delilah cutting his hair exposed that deeper truth, that he had already treated consecration casually before that visible sign was removed. And we connect that to Christians today in how you may have a Christian who treats worship casually, who treats the praising of God casually. And when I'm talking, and I want to be clear, because the idea of casual has changed. I'm not talking about the way people dress or anything like that, though that can be a part of it. But what we're mainly referring to is the attitude and the posture of the heart with which one comes before God. Right? That worshiping God, it's no big thing. Who is God? And Christians can have that type of attitude, right? Instead of saying, I get to go to services, I get to worship God, it's more of a, Sunday again, didn't we just have a Sunday last week? You know, that type of thing, that casualness. Okay, and Christians can be guilty of that as well. And so then eventually, you know, with Samson, it kind of started that casual nature, and then it was very visible that he was not with God any longer. And in Christian terms, we might say that it's backsliding, right? Someone starts to become casual, and they just kind of start backsliding on things, and then it is very evident that they have no interest in God or God's people, right? And then we were going to, I mentioned last week that we were going to pick up with Samson kind of playing with dead animals. A light way to put it, but I was hoping it would maybe pique interest. But before we got there, any questions, comments, concerns as we've been kind of going through and looking at this? Yes, ma'am.
I think one clue is our relationships, who we're friends with, and of course the activities that are connected to those relationships. I think that's something that we want to try to watch.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're told in Scripture, come out from among them and be separate. Evil companionship corrupts good morals. Or there's the old adage, you lay down with dogs, you're going to wake up with fleas, right? So we absolutely, okay, maybe your dog's getting a flea bath, you know, I'm getting some shakes over here. No, we bathe Gizmo regularly. But no, absolutely. And it's not that we avoid those individuals, right? Jesus did not avoid tax collectors or prostitutes or people that were on the edge of quote-unquote respectable society, right? But when he engaged with them, he did it with the intention of changing them. Right? And he didn't sit down with them to endorse the behavior or the activity that they were doing. But he sat down with them, one, of course, to show compassion, but to change them in the sense of, sharing the gospel. For example, the woman at Jacob's Well in John chapter 4, prime example. She has been outcast of the rest of the city. The women, even though it's a matter of safety, the women won't go to the well to gather water or to pull water with her. And she's there. And Jesus, when he shows up, he doesn't endorse these multiple marriages, right? He calls her on it, but he gives her the gospel, right? He gives her the good news. And she goes away rejoicing. So very much as Christians, we definitely need to be careful of our associations, but at the same time, we have to, okay, what is the purpose of the association? Am I associating with this person to endorse what they're doing? Now, I'm not saying that people can't have friends that aren't Christians. I'm not saying that at all, right? But there is a difference between, let's say you have a friend who goes out and gets drunk at various nightclubs and things like that, right? There's a difference between having them as a friend and trying to talk to them about the gospel and what have you. And there's a difference between that and going out to the nightclubs and getting drunk with them, you know? Or even if they were to say, hey, do you think it's okay that, I shoot up heroin twice a week? Granted, that might be an extreme example, but there may be someone who watches this on YouTube who has that very situation. Good thoughts, though. Any other thoughts or comments? Yes, sir.
You were talking about the sense of duty a while ago when it comes to worship or whatever.
Hmm.
You know, some mornings I wake up, it could be Sunday, it could be any day, but I might have a slight cold and my back hurts, this hurts, that hurts, whatever. And you know, I tell myself, well, I'm not quite up to going. But then on the other hand, you're not really sick enough not to go.
Yeah.
And it's that sense of duty in you that tells you, well, hey, you need to get up there and go. And be at worship. And I mean, you know, I'm just using worship as an example, but
No, absolutely.
I'm just saying that's it. I think it doesn't hurt to have somewhat of a sense of duty as a
Absolutely.
Christian, but you know, when you're at the halfway point, you just leave your baby. You know.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, obviously we want to leave room for God's grace. You know, we're not talking about people who, you know, shut-ins, who they can't get out of their
No,
house.
of course not.
Yeah, we're not talking about that or anything. You know, I think an example would be, well, during COVID, right? COVID, you're not allowed to worship if you're X number, and then, you know, it increased to where, okay, you can worship, but you got to be 6 foot apart and all of this, right? Because church was non-essential. But the liquor stores were deemed essential. Walmart was deemed essential. You know, things like that. My point being in what you're saying is, yeah, you're absolutely right, is you can have some people who say, you know, I'm really not feeling that great, so, you know, I'm not gonna go to church today. And yet later that afternoon they're out running errands or whatever. You know, it's kind of like my mom used to tell me when I was a kid. Well, if you're well enough, Michael, to sit there and watch TV, then you're well enough to listen to the teacher. You know, holding the thermometer up to the light bulb and using a damp washcloth did not work that often. But no, there's nothing wrong with a sense of duty at all. And we should have that. So we're looking at this avoidance of death and uncleanness, which is where the playing with dead animals comes in. Numbers chapter 6. Numbers chapter 6, that is the chapter for the law of the Nazarites. Okay? Numbers chapter 6 and verse 6, all the days of his separation to the Lord, he shall not go near to a dead person. Okay? Verse 7, he shall not make himself unclean for his father, or for his mother, for his brother, or for his sister when they die, because his separation to God is on his head. Verse 8, all the days of his separation he is holy to the Lord. Now there is, you know, kind of exception here in verse 9, but if a man dies very suddenly beside him, and he defiles his dedicated head of hair, then he shall shave his head on the day when he becomes clean. He shall shave it on the 7th day. So now this extends beyond just individuals passing away, okay? Because there is also dead animals, right? It was a matter of uncleanness. The dead animals is not so much in the law of the Nazarites as it is in the laws that we read in the book of Leviticus, okay? So just because he's a Nazarite, that doesn't mean he doesn't have to deal with all of these other laws.
It just has extras.
It just adds extras, right? So death, in Scripture, it often symbolizes corruption, decay, impurity, and the consequences of sin. And that element of the vow, it becomes important because Samson, he later becomes comfortable with touching what he was consecrated to avoid. If you look over in Judges chapter 14, Judges chapter 14, verses 8 and 9. When he returned later to take her, he's talking about this wife who looked good to him in verse 7. When he returned later to take her, he turned aside to look at the carcass of the lion and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the body of the lion. So he scraped the honey into his hands and went on, eating as he went. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they ate it. But he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey out of the body of the lion. Okay, first of all, one word, nasty. Okay? Right? I'm all for local honey, but that's a little bit too local right there. All right?
Not for them.
You know, Samson, he turns and he sees a lion there. And the lion, it's a carcass, so it is, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, it is ripped open. Bees have made a nest in there. So the bees have been there for quite a while, right? They've built a nest, honey, and he reaches in and just scoops something out. Sanitation meant nothing to them, right? Food handler's license did not exist. But he reaches in and he just scoops some honey out and he's just eating as he goes along. Hey, Mom, hey, Dad, y'all want some honey that I found? You know? He was comfortable. And even up to this point, he was comfortable touching what he was supposed to avoid. All right? And that's how desensitization often works. Repeated exposure to something, repeated compromise, reduced discomfort, and then eventually normalized corruption.
But he knew it was wrong.
Hmm?
He knew it was wrong.
Oh, absolutely. But he had gotten to the point, he had reached the point where he didn't think anything of it. But at some point he definitely knew. I'll give you an example. You know, movies, right? Movies. Okay. So you can go today and watch a movie that is rated PG. 30 years ago, that movie would have been rated NC-17 or even rated X. X did not always mean nudity. It could just be language, you know? But over time, people became comfortable with it. And so it changed to where, no, you don't have to be over 21 or you don't have to be an adult to go in there. It's fine. It's normal. And that's what happened with him, is that there was this repeated exposure to things that he desired, things of the flesh, things that were ungodly, unconsecrated. And it wasn't as though he came across it once or even a few times and turned and walked away. He started to compromise at every turn. And then he became desensitized to it to where it didn't matter at all. And it made it normal. Right? Make sense?
Well, I think the fact that he didn't tell his parents where he got the honey tells us something.
Oh, yeah. And it speaks more to he didn't think anything about it, or that he knew that it was wrong, and maybe that's why he didn't tell them. It is the fact that sin corrupts, and it corrupts absolutely. See, because by giving them that honey that he scooped out of a dead lion, he made them unclean and didn't give two thoughts about it. Sin rarely affects just one person. Sin is a cancer, and it spreads. And in this case, because someone who had faithful parents, who he was consecrated from birth, and it wasn't by his choice or even his parents' choice. Remember, the angel said he's going to be consecrated. Consecrated from birth, he reached such a point that not only did he not really care about breaking the covenant that he had or upholding that covenant, but he didn't care who else it affected. He didn't think, by giving them this, I'm making them unclean. And remember, we're in a time where we see, though he is still wrathful, we see a lot more visible wrath in the Old Testament of God, you know? And that's a great point though, Sherry. Any other thoughts or comments? But that's how desensitization works. Just repeated exposure, repeated compromise, reduce. We always have to be fighting. We have to fight for our faith. Right? Over in 1 John, chapter 2. John gives us categories that help us to understand not only Samson but ourselves. There in 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 and 16, do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but it's from the world. Now, and we're not talking, notice that he says, do not love the world or the things in the world. John is not talking about you slipped up or I made a mistake. That's not what he's talking about. This love, it is an active pursuit of these things. Don't actively pursue the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. You think of Adam and Eve in the garden. The tree was right there. They saw it. There was nothing wrong with them looking at it, passing by it, or anything. It was just, don't eat from it. And we look back there in Genesis chapter 3. And verse 6 of Genesis 3. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, lust of the flesh, and that it was a delight to the eyes, lust of the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, right? Then what happened? She ate from it. So that right there, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and able to make one wise, the pride of life. She ate from it. She gave to her husband who was there. He ate from it. And then sin comes into the world through Adam. Thanks. Appreciate it. You couldn't fast for a day. You had to listen to your wife. Whatever the case may be. Thanks for ruining it for everybody. And we're to avoid those things. And some people, they might sit there and they say, well, Mike, it's just this. It's no big deal, or it's just that. It's no big deal. But that's how it starts. That's how it's... Eve didn't think it was a big deal either. She was so focused on what she wanted that she took and ate. And then because sin rarely affects just that individual, she contaminates, losing that word loosely, contaminates Adam and gives it to him, and then sin comes into the world, and fast forward, Christ has to die, and what have you, right? And so that can help us. And so, I would say if you're with any friends or coworkers or family or what have you, and they start to say things like, it's no big deal, or don't worry about it, that right there should kind of be like a speed bump in the road. Stop going 50, slow down, and pay attention. Why would someone even need to say it's not a big deal unless they maybe really understand that it is a big deal, or they believe that you think it's a big deal. Kind of like Samson with his parents. Why not say anything to him? Because he knew that it was wrong. Or he didn't care. Right? Lust of the flesh. Samson repeatedly follows his appetite for whether it's honey or whether it's women, just the impulse, lust of the eyes. Whatever appears attractive to him, over time it increasingly overrides what honors God. He tells Dad, go back and get that woman for me. She's pretty. You know? The pride of life. Eventually he presumes there in verse 20 that he can just keep going and, you know, without any consequences. Right? Let's look at another one. Genesis chapter 25.
Before we read that one.
Genesis 3.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I always found it very unnerving for me that the devil told the truth, but he didn't tell the whole truth.
Yeah.
When he said, "You will not surely die."
Yeah.
I mean, skin and me, you take a bite and then drop the egg.
Yeah.
So you got to really listen.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and then after she takes a bite, she's like, hey, I didn't die. Adam, you want some? Hey, I didn't die either. For all we know, they went back and ate all the fruit off the tree. You know? We have no idea how long they were in the garden or anything. Genesis chapter 25, though, another example. Beginning in verse 29 and then reading through the end of the chapter. This is Esau. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And when Jacob had cooked stew, Esau came in from the field and was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, please let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I'm famished. I never really noticed it. It said, let me have some of that red stuff. Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, first, sell me your birthright. And Esau said, behold, I'm about to die. So of what use then is the birthright to me? Jacob said, first, swear to me. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Esau traded covenant privilege of being the firstborn with his birthright. He traded that privilege for immediate appetite. And that's a sobering parallel to Samson's appetite-governed choices. Over in 2 Timothy chapter 4 in verse 10, Paul mentions Demas, that he left him, and it says, because he loved this present world. He left the ministry. Now, there is debate on whether Demas left being a companion of Paul in his travels, or if he left the faith altogether. I tend to believe that he left the faith altogether because Paul says he left because he loved the present world. And we have scripture that we've already looked at that if you love the world, you're not a friend of God. Right? Romans 13 and verse 14, make no provision for the flesh. Holiness requires intentional vigilance. Provision for the flesh creates pathways for future compromise. 1 Thessalonians 5:22, Christians are told to abstain from every form of evil. Believers are called to avoid what nourishes corruption rather than becoming familiar with it. And it's not about what I consider evil or what you consider evil. It's what does God consider evil. Right? Because our opinions change. But the Word of God is the standard. It's the standard for judgment. It's the standard for self-evaluation. It's the standard for walking in our faith. right? But, Samson, he was wanting to fill this immediate appetite instead of holding on to what he had for something better. And many Christians can do that. They can want to fill their appetites with this world rather than enduring for that which is to come and promised him. Drift from God, it's not just an Old Testament issue. Love for the present world can easily pull people away from faithful service. Now some people might ask, why are spiritually dangerous things often attractive initially? Well, temptation rarely presents itself as obvious destruction. It often appears pleasurable, reasonable, familiar. I think probably one of the biggest ones is emotionally satisfying or socially acceptable. I think satisfying emotion is probably, top 3 because it feels what they want. Let me ask this. What are some modern compromises, do you think, that most desensitize Christians?
That was what?
Desensitize Christians. What are some modern things, that compromise, that the world does to desensitize Christians, to where a Christian can reach the point of saying, it's no big deal, don't worry about it, who cares?
The clothing that the young girls wear.
Okay.
Just drives me insane.
They worship. They think they can go to a game, or they can go to their children's parties, whatever it be. They think they can go to that rather than worship. And it's okay. No big deal.
Yeah, I think, and I certainly get what you're saying about the clothing. And you know what, guys, guilty of it too.
Yeah.
I'm just going to call them out. I can't tell you how many guys I see in the store or something like that. I just want to completely embarrass them and just rip them all the way down. It's like you're already having them hang off the rear, so you might as well, whatever. That's just me. I don't do it. I don't do it. But guys can definitely be guilty of it as well. And yeah, with things like sports, for example, the amount of money that's involved, entertainment that's involved, the fame and all of this can certainly draw people away from that. Any other thoughts on what might desensitize Christians? And now, a lot of this is out of our control. It's the world that we live in. There's no one in this room that can that can pass a law on modest clothing. There actually is one city, though, I think they're in Virginia, who made it illegal for guys to wear pants that sag down. Well, we can't individually do that.
I was just going to say, a big one, when you work, is language. The language that you're exposed to. I can't count how many times I would tell people, I don't talk like that.
Right.
Don't talk like that when you're talking to me. You want to talk to me, use words, not adjectives and all that kind of stuff. Language seeps in, just even little bitty kids. I've heard little kids, and it's because they picked it up at home. They've heard those words at home.
And there's filler words. You know, if you don't know what a filler word, it's basically a word that replaces a curse word. You know?
I like to tell the story of my 90-year-old mother-in-law that we were in the grocery store standing in line and there was this big fella who was standing in front of us checking out. And his mouth was so dirty. She finally reached up and she tapped him up on the arm and she said, "Please don't talk like that." And when she started to reach for her, I was saying, "God, please don't let him kill her." But he was very gracious about it,
Yeah.
and he apologized. I think it becomes a habit. I
Yeah.
think it does. I think they don't even know they're saying it.
Yeah. And it doesn't help when, I'm not against psychiatry or anything like that, but it doesn't help when psychologists come along with these studies, and they had one several years ago, that people who cursed were more intelligent than people who didn't. I'm not making that up. That was an actual study. Something having to do with a wider vocabulary or something like that. Okay, so we got 3 minutes left. So just a couple of other Nazarite and Nazarite figures over in 1 Samuel. So just a few pages over. Over in 1 Samuel chapter 1. And, you know, this is Hannah. She's there weeping. And in verse 11, she made a vow and said, "O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thy maidservant and remember me, and not forget thy maidservant, but will give thy maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come upon his head." So there, as opposed to Samson, the angel, you know, telling parents he's going to be a Nazarite, right? This is a woman wanting a child and says, "You give me a child, and the first thing I'm going to do is give him back to you." Right? And so we have that. John the Immerser, very much a Nazarite-like figure. We only have that from Luke chapter 1 and verse 15, that he will drink no wine or liquor or wine or strong drink, depending on your translation. Luke chapter 1, verse 15. He's not explicitly called a Nazarite, but his birth announcement contains those themes of abstinence and consecration and a prophetic calling. And so Samuel and John, they help us see that consecration can produce clarity and faithfulness and courage when it's guarded attentively. Samson, on the other hand, shows that consecration itself does not automatically preserve a tenderness for the things of God. Consecration must be guarded through an ongoing attentiveness to God. How does that translate for us? It is that being a Christian in name, being a Christian because of being baptized for the forgiveness of sins by the grace of God and added to the Lord's church, that does not automatically preserve a relationship with God. We have to guard our faith, and we have to fight for our faith. Any closing thoughts or comments? Yes, ma'am.
The vow, is that if you were born in Nazareth, is that anything to do with the city?
It's got nothing to do. It's got nothing to do with the city at all. So, like Jesus being, he was Nazarene because from Nazareth. It's like you're a Texan if you're from Texas, right? But the Nazarite vow had nothing to do with that. It could be taken, according to number 6, by a man or by a woman. Nothing to do with location. Any other thoughts or comments? Yes, sir.
Could it be something like a written contract?
It generally wasn't written, as far as we know. because there's a lot of documents lost to time. But as far as we know, it wasn't written. It was simply by the behaviors and the makeup of the individual. For example, if you had, long dreadlocks and you avoided drinking and you avoided, dead animals and people, and if you were doing all of these things, then people would kind of know he's a Nazarite. He's taking the Nazarite back. Is it possible that it was written? Absolutely. Like I said, though, we don't have any documents from that time regarding that. Good thought. Any other thoughts?
Did Jesus say that though?
No. Nope. He was a full-on Jew. Okay, well, I appreciate your kind attention. Hope y'all are finding this interesting, and sorry for going a minute over.